Hey there, today we are having a look at the knife of the year. You might tell from my tone that I maybe don't quite agree with the glowing assessment of this blade from the Blade Show Knife of the Year Awards. Look, this is the Lionsteel SR11. It's a really nicely made knife, and it's obviously sort of going for that premium bit of the production market. I'm going to talk you through the knife, tell you what it is, tell you what I like and what I don't like about it. Let's get into it. Alright, so this is an integral handled flipping knife. So an integral handle means that it is one solid piece of aluminium before they make it into a knife, and they just mill everything out and drill everything out. So it has no seams. So say you look at a standard knife, it'll have, two handle slabs and a backspacer, or two handle slabs and some standoffs. This is just the one big handle slab, which doesn't come apart. So then they push the knife and all the hardware down into it, I guess through the top here. They might prise it open and then squeeze it shut, whatever they do. But anyway, it's a very robust way of building a handle, that is for certain. So it's never going to come apart. You don't have to worry about disassembling it. Very much a one-piece deal. There's a pocket clip at the end that is sort of adorned with a glass breaker with a tungsten carbide tip. And the pocket clip is, relatively shallow, I guess, in terms of not going all the way down the knife. Definitely holds it in the pocket though. Looking at it closed still, you've also got a roto block, which is a locking mechanism, a secondary locking mechanism for when the knife is open, which I'll show you in a minute. You've got two jazzy looking pivots that actually just open with a Torx wrench rather than needing any sort of super special wrench or anything like that. There's just a star driver in the middle. And then there is a special wrench that comes with the knife that you can use to take off the pocket clip and rotate it around, which you can do. So black aluminium, the handle material here. This is a blade stop at the back there, that little pin going across there, and then flips open with a flipper mechanism. So this knife can light switch, which is where you slide your finger from top to bottom of the spine, or you can push button, which is where you load the flipper with some force and then sort of cave a bit and out it goes. I feel like one of those yo-yo demonstration videos from the 90s when they're using all these names of knife opening mechanisms, but that's what you call them. So yeah, the flipper action runs on bearings, so it's like a little bearing washer in there. Not loose, not IKBS, but a washer with bearings sort of inside it that spin independently as well. Looking at the blade here, you've got a rather tall blade made of Sleipnir tool steel. You can watch my previous video on Sleipnir steel to see how that performs in this blade here. It has a main flat grind, and then it has a sort of secondary flat here, so you could call it a really high saber, or you could just call it a flat grind, whatever. It's got a swedge cut out here for both tip strength and also for, no doubt, appearance sake. When you cut a swedge, this line here actually becomes like the most rigid point of the knife, and if you lead it straight in towards the tip, it should strengthen the tip a fair bit. The spine of the knife is crowned, which means it is sort of filed or sanded over, so it's nice and smooth. So very, very, very nice to rest your thumb on, I guess. Like, as in, it's not sharp or anything like that. Not going to strike a fire steel, but hey, this is a folding knife. Probably not going to happen. The flipper of the knife forms a guard here that goes down and across, capturing the finger in there. And the edge of this, it came with a pretty hefty convex edge, but I've since put pretty much a mirror polished Lionsteel edge on it, just for a bit of extra cut and performance. So there we go, this is a Maletta design knife. Any tarnishes on the blade are obviously done by me in my testing, so it's a rust spot there. I've got some workshop scratches there from the workshop guide. But yeah, overall it's been a pretty well used knife in the time that I've had it. So let's go into the review and tell you what I like and what I don't like about the knife. First of all, we'll start off with some size comparisons. Right, so first of all, next to the Spyderco Spidey Chef, you'll see that this is not a small knife. It's rather a big knife actually, quite on the hefty side. It's got a roughly 3.5-inch blade. The handle is a fair bit thicker than the Spyderco's. Just overall a bit sort of more brickish and beefy-like. Two words that I just made up just then, perhaps. Brickish, beefy-like. Let's look at it next to a Cold Steel American Lawman. Again, sort of another knife in that 3 to 3.5-inch blade category. Nice big hand-filling knife. A little bit slimmer again, probably a fair bit lighter as well. That's the American Lawman. Let's look at it next to an Open L number 8. We all know the rough dimensions of that one, I'm sure. There we go, so a little bit shorter on the blade, a little bit shorter on the handle. Let's look at it against a Boca Mini Kwaiken, which is, yeah, again, a bit shorter on the blade, a bit shorter on the handle. And, you know, just something we all know, and something I have attained just for this purpose, is a Delica for size comparison. My little green Delica there, that has the 3-inch blade and the... So 3-inch blade from the pivot and the 4.5 inch handle. So you see the Lionsteel is a pretty big knife, probably more comparable in size to the Endura. And then to dwarf the Lionsteel with something, which is probably fair, let's look at it against a Microtech Strider Death on Contact. There we go, that's a pretty big beefy knife there indeed. So what do I like about the knife? Well, I think the most obvious thing about the knife is that it has a really, really attractive design. It's a really nice looking knife, very, very unique looking, very much Lionsteel through and through. Everything from the blade to the handle is the motifs that the Maletta design usually goes along with from Lionsteel. You know, deep, tall blade grinds, blockish sort of handles that are, you know, pretty nice in the hand. You know, it's got a real sort of sense of perhaps, I don't know, class to it, or yeah, just general attractiveness to it. Some people think, as with everything, some people think these are quite ugly, but I think this is a much nicer texture than on the SR1 and SR2, because I think that ripple effect did sort of put a few people off. This has got a little bit of just checkering and a couple of different angles of grind on the aluminium there, but much, much nicer. So it's yeah, a very good looking knife overall. Another thing I really like about it is the action is very, very good on this particular one. I've had some feedback from others whose Lionsteels didn't perform very nicely. The bearings and the flipper tab on this one mean pretty much non-stop, constant deployment. Even in the hands of people who don't usually know how to flip knives, they generally seem to get it first or second try once they get the hang of it. So action is really, really good. It's, you know, full shutty, it's all that good stuff that you want your high-end flippers to be doing, so no problems at all with the action whatsoever. Looking at the other side, it's got the good sort of modern features. It's got the overstrike. See, you've got overstrike protect, not overstrike. It's got lock bar extension protection from this roto block here, which means you can't really push the knife lock over much further than being flush with the handle. And then you've got a the lock bar protector thing on the end there, which you can apparently replace. I guess if you wrote to Lionsteel and was like, hey, my lock bar's out, could you send me another one of these? I guess they would. Aluminium is an interesting topic for frame lock knives, because aluminium is a fairly soft metal, and I'm not sure that the total longevity or total lifespan is of an aluminium frame lock, but I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it's like at least 10 years or something. Like, you're talking big long swathes of time, and seeing as you generally store your knife like this without any pressure on the lock, I think you're fine. So yeah, it's got all the good tech. So it's got the roto block. I don't mind it in this knife here. I've had it before where it's been jiggly, but in this one it's not. In this one it's quite like nicely and hydraulic feeling as you turn it around. What that does is it stops you from being able to accidentally unlock the knife while you're using it. I did use this when I did my cutting tests with the knife, because as I'll get to later, there were some other issues when you're using this knife for a long period of time. But this did add a sort of modicum of safety, whether it's real or implied. One of those things, I often think things like this are a bit of an answer to a question that didn't really exist. I still kind of think that, but it's not too obtrusive, and I actually do kind of like the looks of it against the black as well. I didn't really like it as much on the SR2, but I like it just fine on this one. The blade shape is great. It's a really good actually a great hunting blade if you were a hunter. It's got a really, really nice combination of good flat portion and a really good belly and a pretty soft tip, so it's not a particularly stabby knife, which would be really good for a hunting blade. It's a really tall grind, so once you've got your edge right, which I'll talk about later, it will slice really, really excellently for you. I did a bunch of testing with this knife, of course in my video, and then I've done things like making up a meal with it, all that sort of stuff. I'll probably run a little bit of a testing montage as I'm speaking and just show you all the things that I've been doing with it. And yeah, once you get the edge off, and I'm sort of segueing into the bad stuff here, once you get the factory edge off, really, really good performing knife. Bit on the thicker side, of course. Like say when you compare it to the Spyderco Delica, for example, sort of much thicker blade. But yeah, it's tall enough to be able to still slice pretty well, especially once you've got yourself a nice little mirror polished edge there. Yeah. So yeah, it's a good, lots of the elements of the blade are really, really well done as well. So overall, just a nice old knife. Let's talk about the things that are sort of I'm a bit neutral on, perhaps. So I'm neutral on the pocket clip. The pocket clip is pretty shallow, and it's not particularly, it's actually a little tiny bit away from the frame, but that's good for like your thick pants, like so your work pants. Lionsteel sort of sells this as like a hard use knife. They say, oh, integral, nothing stronger than that, and Lionsteel, super tough, all that sort of stuff. So I guess I can sort of see the philosophy. You're wearing your big, thick, like hard yakka pants, then this will sit quite nicely on that pocket seam. Just your slacks or your boxer shorts or your underpants. You'll be relying more on the weight of the knife. Sorry about this, folks. Rather than the clip itself holding the knife in. So yeah. The blade steel I did a test on. It's not a bad blade steel, but you pay about $270 in Australia for one of these. And Lionsteel is kind of just a mid-range performer at the best. In terms of my testing, I put a workshop edge on it and then put this actual edge here. I've resharpened it. This actual edge here, it did about 180 cuts of my rope, which isn't bad, and it does equate to a lot of real-world use, but for other equivalently priced steels, they'll often do double that. Which, is just something I have to bring up. I'm not cold on the steel, but it's just certainly not good enough to put as like a selling point of the knife. It's tough, certainly. It had great sort of edge stability when I did my chip testing on it, and it's also fairly easy to resharpen, maybe compared to D2, which is apparently, like this is a modified version of. I found it easier to sharpen than any D2 I've had in the past. So I guess there's those for, beneficial statements about the steel, but yeah, definitely just a, mid-range sort of, not a good, not a bad, just a point that I thought I'd cover. Another thing that I'll cover, but I won't particularly draw negatively on, is just the general size and weight of the knife. You just need to be aware of it. It's, fairly large, it's fairly heavy. It's broad as well, so it is wide in your pocket. It's like a big rectangle sort of thing. So you see that, even against like a Spyderco, which is usually quite a wide knife, this one is, this one is pretty wide, and it's wide like all the way down. Spydercos, yeah, they'll have this bulge out, but they usually taper quite nicely at the tip. This is like a big old square knife. Mainly, this lanyard hole here doesn't really do it any favors. They could have taken it off, but then maybe it wouldn't have looked as cool. A lot of this knife is done for looks, I must admit. I must sort of concede that it is very, very successful in looking good, but I think some of the stuff perhaps would have done better if they'd thought practicality over looks, that's for sure. So yeah, let's talk about the stuff that I don't like as much. So for a start, little thing, I'm not a big fan of glass breakers on the back of my knives. This seems like too much of a sort of a fancy knife to have a glass breaker on the back. It doesn't quite sit with me. I would like it if they just offered maybe a second one that was just flattened over. So that would be like a good thing, and I probably would swap this one out for that one if they did do that. So there you go. Two main issues, though. Two main issues. One, the factory edge came it was sharp, but a different kind of sharp. Sharp as if you wanted to spend all day like cutting carpet or like cutting something really heavy duty. Yeah, it came with a good convex edge that was quite thick, like a thick convex edge like that. As soon as I scaled it back to a thinner convex edge using my work sharp, it really did start to perform a whole lot better. And then once I've taken it to a 20 degrees V, it actually performs really, really well. Its potential is there, but it's just a shame it comes in a way that's a bit nichey, I think. I think most people would prefer it came with an edge like this, and then you can convex it if you want to later on. Lionsteel does do thick edges in knives. Every Lionsteel I've had has had the same thing. I'm not going to call it an issue. It's obviously a choice. Some people might prefer it, but my T5, my SR2, the other Lionsteels I've borrowed, loaned, all generally come with a bit of a thick edge, so there's that. But the main thing with this knife is, and as I was very quickly discovered while I was doing my rope cutting test, it was a hot day. My hands were somewhat lubricated by a little bit of sweat. I wasn't hugely sweaty. It was a really hard knife to hold on to. As in, your grip is hard to keep because any lubrication makes your hands sort of just move around slightly enough for your, you not to feel certain while you're using the knife, which is kind of a cardinal sin for a knife that is kind of sold as hard use. And it's the way I'm drawing that conclusion is because they put things like rotor blocks and they torque up the integral handle and they make it a large, thick knife with a really thick grind. They're kind of screaming hard use, but when you go to do repetitive hard use, which is what cutting this rope is, then it doesn't really hold up. So it kind of does, despite all the features that say hard use, it kind of does relegate it back again to EDC, or everyday carry, or light use, or occasional use. And then when you have a knife in that class, then things like the size and the weight and the blade thickness and stuff do sort of start to become negatives, or at least niche things. So only for the big knife guys for EDC really. So yeah, certainly if I was going to be hard using a knife, I would stick with something like my American Lawman. Simple, boring, CTS XHP, couple of different grip styles, G10 handle, nice and grippy, so strong enough, like locks fine. That's what I'd be sticking with. This generally, in my opinion, sits back as a large EDC knife that looks really, really nice, is really well designed and really nicely done, but just has a bit too much smoothness on the handle to be able to take it much further. Other reviews I've watched have noted the flipper tab is a bit too slippery. I haven't particularly noticed that. I guess you only open the knife and then close the knife once during a period of hard use, so I haven't really noticed that. And some say that it's a bit slippery to get out of your pocket, but this clip I'm going to keep it in this looser sort of configuration, and that way it kind of just does pop in and out of my sort of thicker pants pockets well enough. So I haven't had that issue myself. Look, the rest of it is nicely designed, really nicely built. Like you can see, Lionsteel have excellent fit and finish quality control. But yeah, overall, just some weirdness that really stops it from being the knife of the year for sure. I don't know what that award is often given to something odd, a bit of a gimmick sort of knife, or a bit of something that's just maybe pushing the envelope in one sort of capacity. And I guess this is integral flipper knife. Is this the first integral flipper knife? Yeah, there was the Nirvana and the Anthem weren't flippers. Maybe it's just for being the first, but yeah, it's definitely not the best knife of the year. The best knife of the year, in my opinion, was something like the Kaiser T1 or the Alamic Busker, all those other knives that people are saying are much better than this one, and I think that's true. This is a fine knife, but it is not the best knife of the year. So anyway, $270. If this knife design really sings to you, and you don't plan on using it in, like, as Nick would say, the Vaseline factory, then it's probably fine. I do enjoy it. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it or not. I've tarnished it probably a little bit too much to really sell it at a decent price, so I think I might keep it and make it work for a while. We'll see what happens. But yeah, it's an unusual one. It's a nice one, but yeah, the knife of the year, I'm afraid it is not. Alright guys, I'll catch you in the next video. Bye now.